I'm audible. Are you getting tired? If you're tired, it shows you're working hard. If you're not tired, maybe you're not working hard enough. This is the last one of the intonation lectures that I'll be giving. I'll be back later in the week to give some other lectures. This one, making and hearing whole tunes, is a kind of revision of everything you've learned about intonation so far. And tomorrow, for 3 days, Tim will be here to give 3 more intonation lectures particularly about the meanings and functions of intonation patterns. This lecture is still concerned with the form of intonation, its physical form, getting control over the production of pitch patterns and also listening to pitch patterns and analyzing them. I've had a few queries saying, can we have the slides in the Moodle course? Yes, the slides will go into the Moodle course just as soon as I can have a few minutes to move them onto the necessary pages. Some may appear today. Remember that the Moodle course will go on being available for 6 weeks after the end of STEP, so you'll have plenty of time to revise looking at the slides in conjunction with the notes later. So in this lecture we're going to think about the business of performing intonation tunes that have already been planned, hearing and describing clear tunes that are being repeated for you. That's a little bit different from hearing and describing tunes that you hear in spontaneous speech, or even in recorded speech. I'm talking about really very clear examples that are being repeated for you, as for example in a test or an examination. And then the business of planning and performing tunes. If you're given a sentence, how would you choose to say it, and can you say it in a way that's entirely under your control? The first most important thing to remember is that these marks, these tonetic marks, are not just rough indications of what you should do with the pitch. You shouldn't just look at some transcribed material and say, well, that's going up, I'll go up, that's going down, I'll go down. That's not enough. You have to understand the system for describing English intonation so that you can interpret the marks accurately. Of course, they are, as we would say, iconic. The ones that go up have something to do with going up, and the ones that go down have something to do with going down. But it's not just a sketch. It is not just a sketch, it's something very specific. So you have to learn exactly what all of these categories are. And that means learning really the definitions and understanding the technical terms. When you have to read aloud a pattern that has been indicated with these marks, my advice is don't just start at the beginning and go along hoping for the best. You need a system to do this, and my advice is to build up any pattern that you have to perform beginning from the nucleus. The reason for this is the nucleus is the most important thing to get right. If you're doing this, for example, in a test, if you come to me for a phonetics examination, and I'm going to mark your performance of a sentence, most of the marks I give will be for getting the nucleus right, in the right place and with the right tone. So, in making it, you should be first sorting out the nucleus, build up from the nucleus. So here is an example. It's around the middle, just below the middle of page 56 in the handbook. You see the sentence, but couldn't we leave it till Friday? With certain tone marks. Now, looking along that sentence, we see the first syllable of Friday is underlined, That's the nucleus. So the first thing to do is be sure we know how that nucleus will be performed. The tone shown on it is a high fall. What do we know about high falls? They begin high. Whatever else may happen in a high fall, we can be sure there's a high pitch somewhere near the beginning of that nuclear syllable. If we just take the one syllable fry and say it with a high fall, we'll get fry. Fry. Like that. Is this right? Fry? No, that's wrong, isn't it? That's a right. You were meant to say, no, that's wrong, Michael. Is this right? Fry. Fry. Is it right? Yes. Is this right? Fry. No, it's wrong, it's level. What we want is fry. Now you can do it. Okay, good. Now in this case, the nuclear syllable isn't by itself, there's something following. There is one syllable of, what's the bit after the nucleus called? Tail. There is one syllable of tail. What happens to the pitch in the tail after a falling nucleus? On what pitch is the tail after a fall? It is low, yes. If you hear a low tail, you know there must have been a fall nucleus. Equally, if you're trying to do a fall as the nucleus and there is a tail, then the tail must be low. So that gives us Friday. Friday. Because the tail is there, and because there are two syllables to carry the pitch movement, you don't always now hear the big slide down in pitch on the nucleus. Maybe the nuclear syllable is just high. Friday. It doesn't have to be Friday. It can be Friday. But still, we say it's a fall located on the first syllable of Friday because the pattern overall has this falling shape. It's the same shape, but spread onto two syllables, as you would find if it occurred on a single syllable. If there were further syllables in the tail, the pitch would stay low. Friday, Friday. Now remember, what we're doing is building up a whole intonation pattern starting with the nucleus. So in your head, or maybe even aloud, you should be saying to yourself, Friday, Friday, Friday. And then, as you add on the rest of the pattern, you know how it's going to finish. So plan how you're going to finish it first. Ahead of the nucleus, in this case, we have a sequence of syllables making a head. The kind of head marked is a high level head. That means that on the first accent the pitch goes to a reasonably high pitch and it stays there more or less through all the remaining syllables. Of course, it's not flat as if drawn with a ruler. It doesn't really matter if it goes up and down a little bit. It's bound to do. It's just that it's more or less level. So something like, couldn't we leave it till... That may be too much to build up all in one go, so you can take that in sections. Instead of the whole head, we could take the second stress and just say, leave it till Friday. Leave it till Friday. So we've got Friday, Friday, leave it till Friday. And then we're going to extend the head back to its onset. Couldn't we leave it till Friday? Couldn't we leave it till Friday? By building it up in bits like this, you're certain that you have control over everything. And then the prehead, well, the prehead is shown without a mark. It's the one syllable but. A prehead which has no mark is a low prehead, so that'll be something like but couldn't we leave it till Friday is the overall pattern. So when you are given a pattern to read, build it up, that's my advice, build it up in sections beginning from the nucleus. Get the nucleus right, whatever you do. You may find it useful to draw the interlinear representation If it were only Fry, it would fall all the way down. If it's Friday, then we get something like that, Friday. The head is level, so as we add sections of that, the syllables will be going along pretty much at the same pitch. Big ones mean stresses, little ones mean unstressed syllables. And they pre-head low. It's a good skill, it's a worthwhile skill to practice drawing those interlinear representations. Again, although in a way it's a sketch of the pitch, it is relatively precise in the sense that if we're given one of those, if we're given just the drawing, we can work out what the tone marks must be. There's only one set of tone marks that will translate into that pitch pattern. That's when you're performing a pattern of your own. What about when you're hearing one and you have to describe what you hear? My advice again is to be very systematic. Do it in a series of steps. The first thing to do is check how many intonational phrases, how many IPs you're hearing. These steps are identified on page 57. You don't really need to write them down again. First of all, check that it's only one IP. Obviously, if you're hearing two IPs, you can't describe it satisfactorily as one. You'll end up just describing part of it. The next step is to identify the stressed syllables, which you can perhaps do by feeling the rhythm, sensing the rhythm. Check where you would tap your hand or foot in time with the rhythm. This is something I know you have to build up, you have to become familiar with, but every spoken phrase will have a rhythm and you can become sensitive to it and begin to feel where the beats are. One of those stressed syllables will be the nucleus. Usually the nucleus is towards the end. That's the favorite place within the intonational phrase to put the nucleus towards the end. Of course, this is not absolutely reliable. It doesn't necessarily have to be at the end, but in the vast majority of cases, it is near the end. It's certainly going to be the last accent that you hear. In conjunction with identifying where the nucleus is located, you must try to work out the nuclear tone. This is a way of checking that you've picked the right location for the nucleus. Because if you think the nucleus is in a certain place, then there must be a nuclear tone which, if applied in that place, will give the tune ending you seem to hear. Remember, there are no nuclear tones that go along level for a bit and then drop and then rise and then come down again. If you find that the place you've chosen for the nucleus would entail some nuclear tone like that, that's a proof you've picked the wrong syllable. It must be something that makes sense if it has on it a fall or a rise or a fall, rise or a level, one of the ones that you're familiar with. And part of that process too is to identify the tail. There are different kinds of tail, there's no choice about the tail, but it's a way of checking that your identification of the nuclear tone is correct. Once you're sure you've got the location of the nucleus and the type of nuclear tone, you can think about the head. Find the beginning of the head and try to attend to the pitch movement in the head. Finally, ask yourself if there are any syllables left over at the beginning. They will be the pre-head. So if we simply demonstrate this, suppose I say this, I'm going to give you the answer right from the beginning. It's just the process I'm explaining. This isn't a test. If this were an example, you'd hear me saying, I haven't had time to read their report. I haven't had time to read their report. Now, is it one intonational phrase? The answer is yes. How do we know? Well, one thing is, you'll notice there is no pause within it. We don't have the sense of a break or a pause. We could say this sentence has two phrases if we wanted, in a different way. We could split it up. I could say, for example, I haven't had time to read their report. That would make two phrases. But you'd be aware of a break in the middle. When I say, I haven't had time to read their report, it seems to be one fluent phrase. Now, what about picking up where the stresses are? You could probably fairly easily decide there is a stress on the first syllable of haven't and another one on read. I haven't had time to read their report. Would anyone really be in doubt that first syllable of haven't and read are stronger than the others? Along with those, there are two, to my mind, weaker stresses, one on time and one on the second syllable of report. They don't do much, they're just part of the rhythm. If I were tapping the rhythm of this sentence, I think I'd tap 4 times. I haven't had time to read their report. Two of them are much bigger than the others, and the two big ones, those are the two accents. One of them is going to be the nucleus, and the other is the beginning of the head. If you didn't spot that there is a stress on time, and if you didn't spot the stress on report, it wouldn't really matter. It doesn't make too much difference to what the sentence means, even what it sounds like. It doesn't sound too different if I suppress those stresses. The stresses you pick up most easily are those which are reinforced with pitch accents, and those are the ones that are really important in intonation description. The nucleus, well, we have to decide where the nucleus is, and as you see, I'm going to say it's on read. And I'm picking a high 4 nuclear tone. If that were realized on the one syllable read, we'd get read, read. But here there are some tail syllables, and we've got read their report, read their report. If you heard only their report, you could be certain there must have been a falling tone just before that. That's the only thing that would account for this, their report, at the end. Read their report. So now we've got most of the really crucial parts of the description sorted out already. We know it's one phrase, we know where the nucleus is, we know what the nuclear tone is, we know what the tail is. But we noted early on there is a clear prominence on the first syllable of haven't. I haven't had time to, I haven't had time to. That must be the beginning of a head. Now, try to listen just to the head without being put off by the nucleus, as if we could cut the sentence short. I haven't had time to, I haven't had time to, da 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 da. This is on a relatively high pitch, so it's a high head. And I in front of all of this material seems to be on a lower pitch than haven't, I haven't, I haven't. That makes it a low tree head. Here's another example. It doesn't matter what tune is used, and really it doesn't matter what words we take. What matters here is the discipline, the routine of going through the steps, asking yourself all of these questions. And I want to reinforce that point about asking yourself questions, because when we listen to something and we transcribe it, when we listen to something and we, for example, write down symbols, they don't go in your ear and make your hand twitch. That's not how it works. You don't listen and suddenly magic your hand writes. You have to be asking yourself questions all the time. Every time you hear something, you're saying, is it this, is it that? If it were that, what would it be like? Let me try. So you're generating possibilities, hypotheses, and comparing them with what you hear. Listening is a very active process. It isn't just passive. It's not passive at all, as a matter of fact. It's questions, questions, questions. And if you're not concentrating and asking yourself questions, then you won't listen and transcribe accurately. You can't just let it float in and hope that the representation will somehow form itself in your brain. So this one, what do we see? A single phrase. Which syllables are marked as stressed? Well, hope, think, and the third syllable of the word interfering. I hope you don't think I'm interfering. So this time there'll be just 3 beats in the rhythm. I hope you don't think I'm interfering. The last one of those is going to be the nucleus, and you'll see that it's a fall-rise. Now, as you know, the fall-rise may be spread out over a number of syllables. It can occur on 1 syllable, or 2, or more. Here there are 2. So the nuclear syllable itself will be falling, and the 1 syllable of tail, that must do the rising. Fearing, fearing. If you hear just ing, ing at the end, you may think, oh, this is a rise. And true, there is a rise, but what is there just before it? Fearing, fearing, there's a fall just before it. So don't just listen to the end. Quite often, if you listen to the very end, you'll hear the final pitch trend in a pattern, and you hear it very accurately, but it may lead you to make a mistake about the type of tone or the location of tone. Often, when a tone, when a phrase is ending with an upward trend in pitch, the very last syllable has a real kick up in pitch on it. Suddenly the pitch goes like this at the end, and you think, oh, that must be important, but it's just something we do at the end of the phrase. So, for instance, to give a simple example, if I say, why did you say that? Why did he say that? Why is the nucleus, but that has this sudden at the end. It's as if the rise goes along steadily, and then suddenly at the end we just give it another little kick. Don't be misled by that little bit at the end. I hope you don't think I'm interfering. So this is a fall rise on the third syllable of interfering. Realize it's fall on the nucleus itself, a rise on the tail syllable, and the mark in front of hope tells us it's a falling head. Hope you don't think I'm into... So the pitch is coming down all the way through. Hope you don't think I'm into fearing like that. And again, low pre-head. I hope you don't think I'm interfering. Now, I've been talking about very slow, very careful, very artificial examples. Maybe it would be worth just trying to see if we can make this work with a real example or two. And so, I'm going to play you a little bit of radio news, a little bit of BBC radio news, which I've provisionally divided into IPs here, and I want you to listen to it and try and decide where the stresses are and where the nuclei are in this little passage.
Families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
A little bit quiet, let's just make it Louder.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives. 40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
One thing you may notice is, even though he's reading the news very carefully, the word "the" in the last line is pronounced as "s." It's to protest against people carrying knives. The word "the" is being realized just as a fricative noise. You listen.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
No wonder English is difficult to understand. He's going slowly and carefully, and there is an undocumented form of the word "the." In fact, you might be in doubt whether there is an article there at all. Is he saying it's to protest against people carrying knives? I don't think so, because the rhythm suggests that there is something there. We're supplying the, even though all he's doing is a fricative noise. Right. Do you agree with the division into phrases that I have made? So let's try and describe what's happening in the first phrase.
40 families directly affected by knife.
At the very beginning.
40 families.
40 families. 40 families. How many beats do you hear? 2, isn't it? Yes. Tell me where they are. 4. All right, first syllable of 40, first syllable of families. This is one of those phrases, intonational phrases, with 2 prominences in them that I keep talking about. He's producing a short phrase and it's got 2 prominences, one at the beginning, one near the end. The second one, obviously, must be the nucleus, mustn't it? He's not producing the nucleus on the first prominence. He's not saying 40 families, but 40 families.
40 families direct.
Yeah, 40 families. Let's go on and listen to the rest.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
The second line has something very interesting at the end. Have you ever come across this expression, knife crime, before? If not, you can guess what it means. It's a compound. Is it a regular kind of compound in terms of stress? Yes. It's absolutely regular. Knife crime must mean crime committed with knives, and it has its main prominence on the first element, just as all of these new 2-element compounds will. I said the other day that I believe the rule about stressing compounds is worth knowing and it's productive, and really this is my observation, that you can't go more than a few phrases in English without encountering an example of this compound stress pattern. It is very, very frequent. So one thing we know then is there'll have to be a stress on knife and not on crime. Was there a stress in that line before we get to the stress on the compound? Want to hear it again? Is there a prominence before we get to knife?
40 families directly affected by knife crime.
Yes, there is. Where is it? Directly, directly. Second syllable of directly, yes. Now, listen to the third line. This is interesting.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to
Where is the prominence at the end of this third line? Will take part in a march in London later. Why? Why isn't it on later? This follows a simple rule about English. It's an adverb of time at the end. Very good. I could read your lips. You weren't saying anything, but I could. This is, if he were to say, "will take part in a march in London later," you get a special meaning. It is a special meaning in which a march in London has already been mentioned and later is the new information. But we don't mind having an adverb of time at the end of a phrase, even if it's new. We don't have to put the nucleus on it. The appropriate place for the nucleus is London. And then in the last line, there is a lovely example of something you know about. I'm going to play it again. And you tell me what is so exciting about this last line.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
Where's the nucleus in the last line? Carrying. Why? Why is it on carrying? Knives has already been mentioned, yes. You could not put the nucleus on knives because knife has already been implied in the compound knife crime. It's a protest against the people carrying knives. It's a lovely example of how the nucleus shifts according to what has already been mentioned in the context.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
Yeah, so those are where the stresses are. Those are the places we've decided are the nuclei. And we know, we can understand why the nucleus is in each of those places. The basic principle is the nucleus will go as late as possible. But in knife crime, it's on knife because knife crime is a compound. In the third line, London later, it's on London and not later because later is a time adverbial. And carrying knives, it's on carrying and not knives because knives has already been mentioned. The principles you've learnt about are everywhere in spoken English. When people speak, when they read, they follow these principles, and if they don't, it sounds as if they don't know what they're talking about. It sounds as if they don't understand. So if you have to read aloud, for example, and you don't follow these rules, it sounds as if you can't understand what you're reading. When we say somebody is a good reader or a bad reader, we almost entirely mean the way they do the intonation. It's the way they do the intonation that makes somebody sound like a good reader, even of prepared material. I'll play it once more, and you can listen to where the nuclei are. I haven't described the nuclear tones. I'd like you to try and tell me.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives. 40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
Lines 3 and 4, the nuclei are easy to identify. What are they? Will take part in the march in London later. London later. Yes, what is the nuclear tone? I4, isn't it? It's protest against the people carrying knives. What is the tone there? Carrying knives. It's another 4. Yes. More than 80% of all the tones we use are 4s. If you're ever in doubt, use 4s. 4, 4, 4. You think it would be monotonous? No, it's what we expect. Sometimes we need to use others, but there is a danger which teachers of English phonetics are aware of, that once people begin to learn about intonation, they become intoxicated with the choice of nuclear tones and start using everything they can think of. Oh, I haven't used a rise fall for a bit, I'll have one of those. Now I'll have a high rise, time for a mid-level, and so on, especially in making a transcription. And then when you read it out, it's absolutely crazy. She's doing, so, you know, stick to falls. You need a good reason for departing from falls. What do you think about the first 2 lines here? They're a bit difficult to describe.
40 families directly affected by knife crime will take part in a march in London later. It's to protest against people carrying knives.
I think they're both falls. 40 families directly affected by knife crime. But somehow they're not quite final falls. I think there may be falls that are doing partly the function of fall rises. You could replace them with fall rises. 40 families directly affected by knife crime, like this. So the effect you get isn't too different from using a fall rise. 40 families. It's not 40 families, but 40 families. It's not going right down to the lowest pitch. So I think the fact that it isn't a completely low ending fall means that it's kind of equivalent to a fall rise. But I don't know what my colleagues and fellow tutors think. If you did this as falls, it's perfectly acceptable, I think. You can do 4 falls. Well, that was a demonstration, I hope, that the system does work and can be applied to real speech as well as contrived speech. But in the last 5 minutes, have I got 5 minutes? I've lost track of my own time. Yes, I've got 5 minutes, haven't I? We'll go back to some contrived examples because I want you to try making patterns to each other and describe them. If you look along to page 61 of the handbook, page 61, you'll see there are 3 blocks of examples. The first set, numbers 1 through to 8, are sentences where the intonation has been marked for you, and you're to try saying them with the intonation marked. And I'd like you to try this with your neighbours. So if you don't know the person sitting next to you, now is the time to say hello. And I want you to follow the process I recommended of building up the pattern. So I want to hear first just the nucleus, then the nucleus and tail, and then increasing parts of the head until the whole pattern is ready. Okay, so try number 1 together. I'm going to come around and eavesdrop on what is going on. So for number 1 here, you should have been saying first morn, and then morning, and then round in the morning. Bringing it round in the morning. They're bringing it round in the morning. Oh, wonderful. Yes. And then when you go quickly enough, it sounds quite good. They're bringing it round in the morning. Yes. Is this right? I want you to judge mine and tell me if it's right. They're bringing it round in the morning. What is wrong? I used a low fall instead of a high fall. Yes. I should be saying, according to this, they're bringing it round in the morning. But I was going, they're bringing it round in the morning. Right, try number 2. Now, number 2 is a little more difficult because it involves the fall rise and not the fall. Everyone can fall, but not everyone can fall rise. So, try that one together. With this nuclear tone, it's my go. Come on. With this nuclear tone, it's a fall rise. Now, if it's going to fall, it has to start high. I can hear lots of tones that are not beginning high enough. It's got to start high. Early, yes. It's no good going early. It's got to be early. So, fall rise on early. Now, the falling head, this falling head, if we have a fall just starting on come, we'll have come so early. And now trace that back so there's more fall, this time starting on shouldn't have come so early. Oh, good, right. And then a low pre-head in front of that. I shouldn't have come so early. Sounds really good. Sounds really good. And how does it feel? Does it feel okay or does it feel silly? Yeah. So what I have found about patterns like this is that in the class, the students will do them beautifully, and then they go away from the class, and the pitch range starts to get smaller and smaller, and the movements get smaller and smaller, and eventually there's hardly any intonation happening. Now, what you have to remember is, when you perform it, you'll feel a bit silly, okay? But you have to do it till you feel really silly, and then it's probably just about right. Because as you listen to English speakers around you, they do use lots of big ups and downs. And the full rise does go a long way down, a long way up again. And if you want to get that effect, you need to have the courage to do it. I've never ever heard a foreign learner of English whose intonation patterns were too big. I don't know about my fellow tutors, but I've never had to say to somebody, your full rise is much too big. We need to make it smaller. No. It's always, was that a full rise? It was a little twitch in pitch, but I couldn't hear anything. So this time, last time, before we go, I want you to say it again, but I want you to make it really big movements, and please feel very silly while you do it. I shouldn't have come so early. That's wonderful. That's wonderful. Give yourself a clap.